Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. This is the Wednesday, May 31st edition. You know, I was talking earlier today. I can't believe the month of May is already over with. It's been a very active month of May, and we're going to talk a little bit about that before we get into our show tonight. But thanks, everyone who is joining us. We're talking to Jim Williams tonight from HurricaneCity.com. We start the tropical season tomorrow is the official start of the 2017 tropical season. So we're going to kind of give a little preview of what Jim expects to happen over the next few months in the tropics. So we're looking forward to that. This is a live broadcast. So if you are watching tonight, please feel free to interact with us via our Twitter page, our Facebook page. If you're watching after the show, we'll let Jim share his social media, and you can listen on our podcast as well. So like I said, it's been an active start of, or active May. It's been an active week. I know that Ricky and I were both out last week because of severe weather. So, you know, it's just been one of those Mays around here that we've had a lot of severe weather. But first, before I get to any of our panelists, or all our panelists, I'm going to toss it to James, who experienced some of those severe thunderstorms today in the Charlotte area. And James, it's been kind of a stormy afternoon in Charlotte, and you guys saw a little bit of everything.
And hopefully, Scotty, I won't walk out of a Wi-Fi range here in front of my house. The sun is back up moments of the day. The temperature is relatively nice. I got 66 right now. Phone around, so I'll just physically turn it out as any sort of actual local report. But just to give an idea of how much rain we got here in South Charlotte not too long ago, there is just on the other side of that bush a drain that comes down from the roof, and all of that water just kind of slid that pine star right here. So that's, you know, that I don't know if that really speaks to it. Obviously, that is kind of a loosely packed landscaping, but in the 6 months I've lived here, that's never happened before. So make its way towards the drain right now, but it actually is quite quiet and peaceful, and you would not know that we had quite the torrential downpour. And a half or so. Radar estimates about 3 inches here on the south side of Charlotte. This is about 485 Providence Road area. It put on quite the evening show just in time for the PM rush.
Well, we're glad that you were able to rebuild from that, but yeah, definitely some.
We will recover. I know. That's not. That's the most impressive thing I can show you in range of the Wi-Fi.
but no, all jokes aside, it was a stormy afternoon in Charlotte, and glad that there was really no major damage. I know we had some heavy rain and some trees reported down throughout the metro areas, so thankfully nothing too major. So we're going to toss it over to Ricky Matthews, who Ricky, it's been a very busy week for you guys up in East Tennessee. Tell us what's been going on.
Yeah, Wednesday we had a few. We had a tornado watch come out actually last week on Wednesday, hence why I wasn't here, and really didn't get a ton of severe weather out of it. We got storms earlier in the day coming through around 11 to 12 to 1 or 2 o'clock that produced hefty damage, a few microbursts across the area. Then we had storms Saturday too in the afternoon, which was always fun. And then we had that derecho come through at 11 o'clock. So we have had a couple rounds of storms, and now dealing with a few pop-up showers and storms around the area. Nothing too hefty, a few downpours here and there. Temperatures that are pretty nice for this time of the year, Scotty. Upper 70s, low 80s. And there's no race here at BMS anytime soon, so I'm not really sure why it's raining. Typically, we have to have some big event scheduled to get, you know, lots and lots of rain. At least that's how it always seems to go.
Yeah. It's you know, you're talking about the races. The Charlotte area saw the 2 weeks of NASCAR, and I think during that time we dealt with maybe 3, 4, 5 rounds of severe weather. Then the race was actually affected Sunday evening from a thunderstorm, and like you said, tornado watch up last Wednesday, which was why I wasn't here. I was out at the Speedway helping over the thousands and thousands of campers, making sure that they were alerted and safe from that. So it has been a very stormy week and a stormy month for North Carolina. I know severe weather taking place up in the Greensboro area tonight. Yesterday, there was a straight line wind damage event just south of Raleigh in Sampson County. And Ricky, I know you and I were talking about this earlier. I can't remember the exact path, but up to 90-mile-per-hour wind at sometimes. And I know you guys had a tornado a couple of weeks ago, but weaker tornadoes that we see around here and those damage and straight line winds, they kind of produce similar damage.
Well, even the microbursts we had with those line of storms that came through, I would probably estimate winds for, probably 60 to 80. We have pretty big trees down in spots. The damage was, that's the key indicator to me. The damage was more widespread from that microburst. When you look at the damage path, the damage region, you can almost sometimes distinguish whether it was a tornado or straight line winds from that alone, because the tornado, you usually have a concentrated path of damage. With these wind events we've been having, we've had more widespread damage. That one in Sampson County you're talking about, craziest stat from that, I think, was 16,000 turkeys that were killed from the 80 to 90-mile-per-hour downburst winds. So interesting storms that have come rolling through it. And that one didn't have a severe thunderstorm warning on it, which brings up, another interesting point about radar coverage in North Carolina. That we've discussed many times before, and I'm sure we'll continue to discuss until some metal gets put up with a radar beam on top of it somewhere in North Carolina.
We're hoping so, somewhere between Charlotte and Greensboro. Like you said, Ricky, a lot of mobile homes damaged yesterday too, and those mobile homes are very dangerous to live in when you have high winds like that. So our thoughts are with those folks who are recovering from that. I want to go up. I see Shay's here, so I'll let Shay get settled in for just a second. I'll go up to Peter first. And Peter, you are not in the Carolinas, but you've also been experiencing some stormy weather up there in the Northeast.
We have not seen the sun since Saturday morning. Today was the first day we actually saw the sun. So it was a very happy day for me. But we need some vitamin D pills around here or something. I don't know. But this whole month has just been up and down like a big roller coaster. It's very below average this whole month. Normally we're around 78, 79 this time of year, but we've been 60s, 70s, a couple 50s, 90s. I mean, we've been all over the place. And 7 of the last 10 days we've been cloudy. So it's just been really, really gloomy and unsettled and horrible around here. Also, we've had 6.33 inches of rain so far this month too, which is 3 inches above normal. So everything's above normal, below normal. It's all over the place. Next couple days though, not looking too bad, I guess. Sun, some storms, mixed bag of everything. 70s and 80s coming back too. So hopefully June is looking better for us, but I think the Climate Prediction Center had below average again for us, so just can't get out of the doom and gloom, I guess.
Yeah, it's been like that here in the Southeast too. A lot of stormy patternness and rain and stuff like that. So speaking of a nice place to be, let's go down to Shay Gibson, who's in Charleston, South Carolina. And Shay, how's things been down there along the coast?
Pretty hot and muggy, actually, the last couple of days. We had some really nice weather over the weekend for Memorial Day. Pretty hot temperatures for Sunday, but it was pretty nice for Friday and Saturday at least. The sea breezes came up, so it was really nice, moderate winds on the beaches. And hey, kiteboarding, man, it was great. Really good time. Sea surface temps are about 80 degrees now, and maybe down to 82 in southern Georgia. But they're warming up fast, and so is the Gulf of Mexico, for that matter, along the Loop Current. Ran the NASA Sport SST sea surface temperature loop, and it is warming up out there along our oceans. So right at the start of the tropical season, we're already almost at optimal temps for tropical system. So that's right on target for what the hurricane season, why it starts on June the 1st. And sometimes we see early activity, but nothing as of yet. We are watching an area. It is Tropical Depression 2E, and that is in the Eastern Pacific, just south of Mexico, south of Oaxaca and Chiapas. And that is forecast to become a tropical storm. So that would be Beatrice. And it is expected to make some sort of landfall, and possibly GFS is bringing it across into the Gulf. But we will have to wait and see what happens with that. It's kind of a long shot, but there is some indication of that. I don't want to get too much into the tropics because I know our guest has a lot to speak about it. But for the southeast region, pretty hot and muggy. We have a lot of troughing overhead. What to expect is continued cloudiness, mixed layers of clouds. We'll probably see some afternoon storms pop here and there over the next few days, at least until Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, when things sort of clear out again. Peter, you were talking about cool pattern, and looking a little bit beyond up to about June 7th and 8th, it looks like a large ridge is going to build down from the north from Canada. So we could be looking at some pretty cool temperatures, actually, or I should say mild for near summer temperatures, diving down to the southeast. So that northerly winds, you know what that means, and you might feel it up there in Jersey. So back to you, Scotty.
I'm done. I'm ready for it to be 80, 90 degrees of summertime. I'm tired of this cold, cooler, stormy pattern. Let's get this Atlantic ridge to build in. Let's get some warm temperatures here. I mean, why couldn't we have this pattern back in January? Huh?
I know,
anyway.
right? Well, hey, enjoy these cool spells before the heat comes on, because that's how it is in the southeast. It's and hot everywhere for that matter. But yeah, we had, I think it was last year, we had a nice little northeast event that set up right at the middle of June, and man, I'll tell you, it felt great. I mean, high temperatures were only around 80, and the nighttime temperatures were upper 50s. It felt awesome. So take it while you can get it.
That is true. Well, I'm going to toss it over to Ricky, and he's going to bring in our guest tonight. We are talking about the tropics. So if you are watching tonight, make sure you follow along with your simulcasting on Facebook Live. Also follow us on Twitter. Please feel free to send any questions in, and we'll make sure we get them to our guests. So, Ricky, if you're ready, I'll toss it to you, and we'll get started tonight.
Yeah, sorry, we just had a quick little microburst happen in our downburst in the city of Hampton. The ASOS reported a 60-mile-per-hour wind gust on a storm there, and I was looking at some of the radar images and creating a little graphic. But we'll jump into tropical weather instead and get out of thunderstorms. We've talked about enough of that. Very happy to bring in Jim from HurricaneCity.com on our show this week. Jim, welcome.
I'm glad to be here, and I'm sorry I don't have my video working, but we'll trudge through it. I have a face for radio anyway, so maybe this is for the best.
See, now you can sit around your pajamas and no one even cares.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
All right. Well, tell us a little bit about what Hurricane City is and how long it's been around.
Hurricane City, I developed in GeoCities way back in 1997, and built the site with plain HTML. I didn't use any stencils or anything, and purchased a domain in early '98 and put it online as a domain, and been running it for what's going on 20 years now on the internet. And actually, I used to do live shows way back before anybody else was doing it. Back in the late '90s, used Real Audio Player and did audio only shows that were live. We'd cover hurricanes, talk while they were hitting land, and talk to people that were in the storm. It was a lot of fun. And then, of course, everything that evolved with the Ustream and YouTube and all these other ways of broadcasting. And I admire what you guys are doing, by the way. And I did catch your interview with Levi Cohen the other day, a couple weeks back. That was a great interview. Appreciate that. But Hurricane City, what Hurricane City is about is when there's a system affecting land or heading towards land, I feature the city or island that's in harm's way. And when you click on the city or island, it gives you all the local webcams, radio feeds, radar images, news, power outages, Twitter feeds, everything from the affected areas. And I also have best performing models on the site. What we do is calculate all the models and break it down to the 5 best performers, and they display on the map along with the cone of error from the National Hurricane Center. All the products, as far as the tracking, is from the National Hurricane Center, so there's nothing made up at our end or anything like that. It's all extracted from NHC. And we do live shows like you're doing, still do them. In fact, tomorrow I'm having my hurricane season kickoff show, which I've been doing for, I don't know, 13, 14 years, doing that show. So, and I have a database where you can search your city or island and find out all the statistics from where you live, how many hurricanes, how many tropical storm, hurricane to tropical storm ratio, the most likely time of the year that your city is going to get hit. It gives the whole hurricane history of all the hurricanes that have ever hit that area and what the details are. And that's basically what the site's about. And I see you have the screen capture up. That's a GIS map. Everything is done through GIS maps on the front page. And the countdown clock is activated when there's an active system out there. And we use the range rings of the tropical storm force wind field and measure that against it's based on the official forecast from NHC. And the countdown clock is activated at that time, and it counts down till the tropical storm force winds arrive. And below the tracking map, we have different GIS maps that you can click on to see different like water temperatures, zoomed in satellite, Hurricane Hunter aircraft fixes, which shows the actual Hurricane Hunter logo on the screen, and you can follow the plane around as it flies into the storm. And when you click on it, it takes you to a page with all the detailed observations in English, so you can understand what's going on from the aircraft. And let's see, we even have the radars from the aircraft from time to time when they're available, ships and buoys from all over the Atlantic. In fact, the surge potential maps are pretty cool. You can tell what each category hurricane is capable of in your area when a hurricane is on the move. And those are also from the National Hurricane Center. So they, you know what, interesting, I just saw that you did click on that, and sometimes they load, sometimes they don't. I don't know what's going on with that. I got to find out what's happening. It did load the other day when I clicked it. What browser is it? This is, yeah, there we go.
It may also be the sharing.
Yeah, my computer is pretty maxed out right now, Jim. It's doing Facebook and Periscope and Hangouts, and so I apologize if it's lagging a little bit here, and maybe somebody else will want to drive our tour.
You know what you might want? Oh, this is an interesting show. This is another GIS. These are all shape files on here. This shows up the radar all over the country, and the Puerto Rico radar is on that as well. And the Virgin Islands, I believe, and that should be showing the satellite as well. That occasionally is inoperable, but the best page for all the information is basically the main tracking map on the front page, where you can zoom down to street level almost, and you can get population numbers for all the areas that could be impacted by a storm. And the red blinking light is based on the current featured city, which is Marathon, Florida. And that just basically will be moved around the map when whatever featured city I have up there when a hurricane is on the move. That's the city of most concern when a system is active out there.
So this is really, a labor of love almost for you. Where did the inspiration to create a hurricane website come from? Back in the days when the internet was kind of still in its infancy.
Well, yeah, I started this a long time ago, back in the late 90s, and the only site that was out there at the time that I saw was the Weather Underground, and there was a couple of people that were interested in hurricanes, but there was really nothing in the private sector that was strictly for hurricane tracking. And so I decided to make a site that was not just about tracking the hurricane, but talking about where they're going to go, because that's what everybody wants to know. Where are hurricanes going to go? They don't want to just know how many there are out there, what the ACE is, and all these other statistics. People want to know where they're going to go, and that's what motivated me to make HurricaneCity, so people could follow a storm and then project based on model data where it may go. And then I've always featured the city that I thought, based on model data, was going to be the most impacted by a hurricane as it's on the move. So I felt like people want to see what's going on, get you down to street level, see what's going on with the webcams, radars, everything you would need from the affected area. And the only way I could do that is by building a website. And, even when I was back in high school, back in the early 80s, I even had the No Weather Radio. I'd bring it with me to school to listen to the latest information coming out of the National Hurricane Center. I've been obsessed with hurricanes since probably middle school. And what really got me into hurricanes was the late Bob Weaver on WTVJ Channel 4 here in South Florida, the CBS affiliate, which was NBC at the time. And he would come on and talk about tropical waves coming off Africa, and he'd show a tracking map. And I would be obsessed with tropical waves coming across and the grids on the tracking map. So what I decided to do is make a gigantic tracking map, and I put it on my wall in my bedroom, and it covered the entire wall. And I still have one to this day. Actually, it's made out of a door skin, and I'd love to show it to you, but my camera isn't working. But it's a big, gigantic door skin with the grids on it, with the latitude, longitude maps, and it shows only all the Category 5 hurricanes that have made landfall in the Atlantic Basin. since 1900.
Do you have a storm that impacted you, years ago that kind of reinforced your interest in hurricanes?
Well, I guess you could say maybe Hurricane David in '79. That was right around the time that I really started getting interested, so where it was an obsession with me. But even though it didn't hit South Florida, it actually came, the eye did touch shore in West Palm Beach. But I was living in Fort Lauderdale, so it was kind of a brush for us in Fort Lauderdale. But I remember all the tree limbs down and all the hype regarding it. And ever since then, I've just been crazy about hurricanes.
Yeah, Jim, you're talking my language because that came right over Charleston, and I was young, and that's what another reason it got me hooked on weather myself.
Yeah, David was one that could have been. Of course, it killed a lot of people in the Dominican Republic. I think 1,200 people died down there, and it hit there as a Category 5. Came right into Santo Domingo, and just leveled towns and leveled forests and just killed a whole bunch of people. And then, of course, by the time it came out the other end near Haiti and the Southeast Bahamas, it was down to a Category 1. And we all thought it was going to regenerate and become a major hurricane and hit Florida. So naturally, the coverage was through the roof on that, but it never really recovered. It got back up to Category 2 and kind of skimmed the Florida coast, starting at West Palm Beach, and then went right up toward the Carolinas and made landfall up there. But that was my first big one.
So talk to us a little bit about what HurricaneCity does, let's say from the time a storm forms to the time it makes landfall.
Well, from the time it forms, we have the invest on the map at HurricaneCity, the invest are 90L through 99L. And the models start running at that time. We run the BAM and the other model is slipping my mind at the moment, but there's two of the generic models, the early cycle models that just show the early cycle thinking of the models. And then after about 24 hours, all of the models show up on the model maps at HurricaneCity, the best performers, of course. And then from there, the cone of air will show up from the National Hurricane Center once it becomes a tropical depression. And then I'll start featuring a city or island that I think is at high risk. And that's based on strike probabilities and model projections. And I have a really good track record at figuring out where they're going to go, probably 5 to 7 days out. Sometimes I'm outside the cone of air from the National Hurricane Center, but usually I'm in the cone of air. That's how good the National Hurricane Center is. Very rarely are they, 4 or 5 days out. Does it go outside the cone? If any, it's very slightly outside the cone. And then, of course, I move that featured city based on future model runs and what the track of the hurricane is, whether it's changing or the pattern up front of the hurricane is changing, and then I'll shift cities or islands accordingly.
And one of the things you do each year is kind of forecast what cities you think may be impacted as well, right?
That's right. Before each hurricane season, I used to do it on June 1st on my kickoff show, but the last few years I decided on May 15th to release my cities and islands that I think are at high risk. So what I do is take the 152 cities in the HurricaneCity database and break it down into 20. And the 20 are found based on how many named storms I expect the upcoming hurricane season. The last 4 years, I've been pretty good at that. I've only been off by about 1 storm a year the last 4 years. In fact, that's just about as good. That's just as good as AccuWeather and WeatherBell. And some of the other forecasters like Phil Klotzbach have not done quite as well the last 4 years in picking the amount of named storms there's going to be. So that's the most important factor. How many named storms are there going to be? So, for example, this year I'm expecting 12 to 14. I originally was going to go 13 to 15. Then the talk of El Nino started in April, and that's when I made my forecast. So I kind of stuck with the April forecast, which was for a weak El Nino going into the late in the season. Looks like that might not happen now. We might be more in a neutral type situation. So maybe my original 13 to 15 is probably more likely what we would see coming up, but that won't change my predictions as far as my cities. So, and I also factored on due or overdue cities based on return rates. So once I get my top 20 based on those criteria, then I start breaking it down based on ENSO analog years, the North Atlantic oscillation, whether it's positive or negative, trends such as if a hurricane hit an area 8 years ago, what's going to happen, what happened 8 years down the road, that sort of thing. And the of course, the number of named storms, how many times has that city been hit when there's been the expected number of named storms that I'm expecting. And each city gets a yellow box if it wins each category. Whoever ends up with the most yellow boxes on the predictions gets it into my top 5. And that's how I arrive at my top 5. The last 13 out of 15 years, I've got it at 50% of my top 5 have been impacted, which is pretty good considering I started with 152 locations.
Is this like a coded model you run, or kind of like a lot of data analysis? How do you go about doing the actual number crunching?
Well, if you can go back, yeah, that page right there. Just scroll down a little further. Keep going down. You'll see a box with a bunch of yellow. There you go, right there. This is where the number crunching comes in, and there's the top 20 on the left. So the first category is how many times has this city or island been hit when there's been 12 to 14 named storms since 1990, and the winner down there is my number 1 pick, which is Sable Island, Nova Scotia. That wins that category. Then the next category over is based on the actually, let me get that. Is based on ENSO analog years, which I kind of screwed up on that because I was going based on an El Nino type season, so we can kind of disregard this column. But the winner in that one was Halifax, Nova Scotia, 3 seasons. They were hit when there was similar analog years to what I'm expecting this year. Then we talk about due or overdue for a tropical storm. The winner is the Cayman Islands. In that category, 6 years, which that area hardly ever is overdue for a named storm, much less a hurricane. And they're also overdue for a hurricane by 2 years. Then we have the average number of named storms. This is important. I'm expecting 12 to 14 named storms. And I was kind of leaning on the low end of the scale when this chart was made. And that would be Long Island, New York, won that category. But I'm looking at that column now, it would probably be, if I were to do the predictions today, it would probably be more like Gulf Shores, Alabama. But Gulf Shores is my number 2 pick anyways. So I really have a feeling for that area, the Northern Gulf Shores, Alabama. The next column over is really interesting. Well, the North Atlantic Oscillation is kind of new. But what I did is took all of the North Atlantic Oscillation years where there's positive NAO in April, and then look back in history since 1990 to figure out how many of the cities were impacted in positive April NAO conditions. And that doesn't tell you what it's going to be in August and September, but I'm just extrapolating it. And found out that the Marathon area has been hit 8 seasons when there's been a positive NAO since 1990. So that's pretty impressive. And then finally, the last category is the trends since 1990, since 1871, I'm sorry. Sable Island, again, wins that category. 8 times they were affected 8 years after a brush. That was the last time they were affected. So that's a lot of times they've been hit 8 years later. And they weren't hit any sooner than that, like 5 years later, 4 years later. But 8 years later, that's happened 8 times. So that's a pretty strong indication of a trend. And then, of course, the last column is the whether they were ranked last year or not. And Isle of Youth Cuba wins that. So whoever has the most yellow boxes usually makes the top 5. And my top 5 are Sable Island, Nova Scotia, number 1. Gulf Shores, Alabama is number 2. Number 3 is Marathon, Florida. Number 4 is the Isle of Youth, Cuba. And number 5 is what did I have? The Cayman Islands, because they just are way overdue. And I really have a feeling for the Cayman Islands this year as well.
When we're talking about Nova Scotia and Halifax, does that include extratropical systems, or are these fully tropical?
Yes, that'll include extratropical. All the stats at Hurricane City based on brushes and hits are based on extratropical, subtropical, and all tropical hurricanes and tropical storms. There's nothing excluded. In fact, your area there in North Carolina, the Outer Banks are the #1 most affected area in the entire Atlantic Basin. In fact, they get brushed or hit by a tropical system once every 1.7 years, which is astounding. It's far more frequent return rate than most other cities in the Atlantic, than all other cities in the Atlantic Basin. The nearest one is actually Wilmington is very close, and Morehead City. All three of those cities are in the top 5 most affected areas in the Atlantic Basin by all storms.
Lucky us, right?
Well, I mean, look, you stick out in the Atlantic like a thumb, and all the systems that are recurving, that are getting caught up in troughs, are coming across and clipping the North Carolina area, or they come in from the Gulf of Mexico, cutting through what I call backdoor systems. They come in from overland. So the Carolinas, at least North Carolina, not South Carolina, but North Carolina gets walloped on a regular basis.
Well, you know, Jim, I can attest to that. You know, your pick for Sable Island in that area. I don't know if Pete could switch over to my screen to show the sea surface temperatures, but you see this giant eddy just south of Nova Scotia in the Gulf Stream, and all this warm water. It's anomalously warm water up in that area right now. So anything following to the north up along the Gulf Stream is going to continue to get surface fueling. And that's probably very shallow warm water. I mean, all of the Gulf Stream is thermohaline current, so it's a surface current, but it tends to get deep in the middle. Once you get up just south of Nova Scotia, up in that area off the northeast coast, you get that cool water influx down from the north. So yeah, that'll be very interesting to see if your #1 pick pans out this year. I would think anything that heads to the north up along the eastern seaboard would likely become extratropical by the time it reaches that area. Probably, you know, ingesting some cool air from the north and trying to occlude out the warm air. So that's a fair assumption, and exactly like you said, the positive NAO.
I know it's not a sexy pick because there's nothing but horses living on that island, from what I understand. But well, there's a few people that live there. I guess they maintain some kind of a building there or something. But it's just a little sliver of land that sticks out about, I don't know, maybe 100 miles south of Nova Scotia. And a lot of systems, they're one of the most affected areas in the Atlantic Basin, believe it or not, that far north, because they stick out. And a lot of these systems, just like with Cape Hatteras, they're recurving and they're clipping that island on the way out to sea. A lot of systems have passed just south of that island or right over it. And it's not a hard pick to pick that island because, kind of like Cape Hatteras, it has a high frequent return rate, and all those criteria lined up for Sable Island as the #1 pick. But also of interest is, since 2000, this is pretty interesting, there's been more landfalls north of 30 degrees than in any other time that you go back to 1870s. There's been more landfalls north of 30. There's been an increase in it significantly. Now, I don't know if it's because of those warm sea surface temperatures you just showed, but there's been a definite increase in landfalls north of 30. And of course, Bermuda gets hit a lot too. So that also factors into it. Yeah, there's the island, Sable Island. A few little buildings in the middle, and there's mainly horses running around out there. I'm not sure how many horses live on that island, but
it depends on how the hurricane season goes.
Yeah, I guess they just back into the wind, you know, like a cow, and they just,
yeah.
You know,
like the horses we have on the North Carolina Outer Banks. You know, everyone worries about them after the storm, but they probably have managed through the storms better than the humans have over the years.
Oh, nature knows how to survive. It's us humans that don't get it. And what drives me nuts is we put out these warnings. Well, I say we, the National Hurricane Center puts out these warnings every year, telling people this is what you can expect. I mean, the whole Katrina thing was ridiculous. There's no rhyme or reason we should have 2,000 people dying in a hurricane in the 2000s. But yet there's this reluctance to leave. I understand you want to protect your property, or you have pets, or some other reason you don't want to leave, but your life isn't worth it. If you know that you're in a high risk area, especially with the storm surge potential, and especially with climate change and the water's rising higher and higher, why would you even take the risk? People need to really pay attention. And when the National Hurricane Center puts these surge maps out, which we're going to have at HurricaneCity, by the way, the surge maps will open up on the main map there. just with a thumbnail below it. But pay attention to those surge maps, because you got to know if you're in an evacuation zone. There's no reason we should be seeing thousands, much less, hundreds, much less thousands of people dying. I don't know if you guys caught the video I did of the predictions this year, but at the very beginning, Dr. Neil Frank from the National Hurricane Center, I'm sitting down with him at a conference, and we're talking about people dying in hurricanes, and I asked him, do you think we're going to see hundreds of people die in a hurricane again? And he's like, well, no, it's not hundreds we're worried about. It's thousands of people dying in a hurricane. And sure enough, right after that conference, that was 2005, here came Katrina, and the rest is history. And I did predict that, by the way, on my predictions. I had a video saying that I expected a high death toll in the Gulf this year, and I've never said that in any other year. So that's pretty astounding. I never really got much credit for that call, by the way. It kind of peeves me a little bit, but I did call it. Nobody else in the industry that I know of called for that to happen in 2005.
Certainly a remarkable year, and one that we kind of hope never comes back. So.
Yeah, population's only growing.
And it's not just if I say something like that could potentially happen, it's also what I don't say. There have been people that have been mad that I don't pick their city to be impacted, which is kind of crazy. But I tell them, look, it's not, you should be happy if I don't pick it, but a lot of the years that I don't pick it, they don't get affected. So it's not like I'm picking on your city saying, well, you're never going to get another hurricane. It's just that, most of the time, if I don't pick your city, you're not going to get affected. Sometimes I will pick your city and you're not going to get affected. And a lot of times I'm going to pick cities, and in fact, 2013 and 14, none of my top 5 were impacted, which were horrible prediction years for me. And there were other cities that were impacted. So I always tell people, this is just a general guidance. There are going to be areas hit that I don't even anticipate being hit.
And Jim, that's something you're talking about, Gulf Shores being your number 2 spot. It's been a while since the Gulf Coast has really experienced a hurricane. I know we had Hermine last year that came in as a Category 1. But overall, the state of Florida and even into the Gulf Coast, it's been a while since a major hurricane's hit that area. Why do you think that is, and what do you think? Kind of give us a little bit better idea of why Gulf Shores may be number 2 on your list, or maybe even number 1. You're talking about, with some of the newest data coming out.
Well, the reason there hasn't been any majors lately in the Gulf is because the wind shear has been ridiculous. Every system that's been in the Gulf has been lopsided. If you look at Hermine last year, it was having trouble getting its act together. Cullen last year, having its trouble getting its act together. Lopsided systems, all the convections on the right, very little on the left side of the center of circulation. You have dry air working in all the time. Almost every single system that I've tracked in the northern Gulf of Mexico, for whatever reason, Rita, Katrina, all of them, even the majors, there's been dry air intrusion. When they approach the northern Gulf Coast, the dry air works its way into the southern circulation, and it gets this bat look, which is a dry air slot on the southern side of the circulation. And these storms, even when they make landfall, all the devastation and the wind is on the north quad, northeast quad. The southern quad isn't as intense because they've been all dried up as they come in. So that's my guess as to why there hasn't been as many intense hurricanes in the Gulf of Mexico, is because of dry air and shear. And a lot of systems have been turning before they get to the Gulf as well. A lot of troughiness on the East Coast. There hasn't really been a lot of activity in the Gulf of Mexico. To be honest, it's really been kind of sparse lately, but they've been sheared when they've been in there. So, but as far as Gulf Shores being my number 2, Gulf Shores, well, they have, again, in my criteria, believe it or not, none of the Gulf Shores did not get any yellow boxes, but it has 2 years where there's been impacts in 12 to 14 named storms. 2 years when there's been ENSO analog years like I'm predicting this year. They are not overdue for a named storm, but they are 3 years overdue for a hurricane. And they get hit when there's 13.66 named storms. So I think that right there is an important factor. And they've been hit 4 times when there's been a positive NAO in April. So, and also they have a trend of 4 times affected 8 years after a hit. That was the last time they were hit. They were hit by a tropical storm 8 years ago. And 4 times since 1871, that's happened 4 years later. And I've had the Northern Gulf in my sight for the last couple of years. I think last year I had Fort Walton Beach and the Panhandle at a high risk in my top 5. Panama City Beach was in my top 5. So I think it's just a little shift to the west, and I am expecting that area in Alabama, Mississippi to get something this year. It doesn't mean it's going to be a hurricane. It could be a tropical storm. That's all it takes for me to knock it off the list.
And another, go ahead, Shay.
Go ahead. I was going to add to the Gulf. The Gulf has been an area, just like you said, a high area of shear, and a lot of that's due to lack of the MJO signal, where you get a relaxed environment over the Gulf of Mexico aloft. You have, and during El Niños, you tend to have these large Pacific ridges, the North Pacific High in particular, which drives the jet stream around it, up and around and down into the heart of the United States, to the deep south. So you had last year, I saw at least 2 different times when there was potential in the Gulf, but there was just an upper trough digging all the way down to the Gulf and extending all the way across the southern tip of Florida. So until you get the subtropical jet to lift up and across, up over the Gulf states to relax that upper shear, then you end up having too much of a turbulent pattern in the Gulf of Mexico for anything to form. And so that's kind of what we're looking to see what happens this year, because the models are now starting to trend towards a very mild El Nino, the latest plume viewer. And Nino regions 3, 3.4, and 4 are all, I don't know, they've just recently hovered around 0.4 to 0.5 degrees above normal. And that's going to be El Nino values that they hold for, 2-month period. Sometimes they elevate it, or they go into watch mode. But for the most part, I think they're still expecting a neutral season until maybe late summer. So we'll have to see what happens with it.
Yeah, there is still an easterly flow in the eastern Pacific right now, which is keeping that Kelvin wave in check. It's not allowing the trade winds to blow from west to east to allow that hot water to build up over there. So I'm still a little skeptical about whether we're going to see. I mean, I guess we could maintain those temperatures out there. That's possible. But it looks like it's in a slight cooling trend. So I don't know if we're ever going to see an El Nino, anything of 0.5 or over at the height of the season. I don't know. But to go on your point about the winds coming over into the Gulf, that's a good point, because what we've seen, especially the last few years, is not much early season development, and that the Gulf of Mexico, especially if you chop it in half from, say, Mississippi, let's go with, Mississippi, Louisiana border west towards Texas. They tend to get hit early in the season on average. In fact, they're the earliest in the entire basin for getting hit by named storms. If you want to be early in the season and get tropical activity, go to Texas, right? So we've seen shear early, and that's probably prevented these areas from being impacted a lot because they get a lot of the early season storms. So if that pattern gets more favorable in maybe June, July, then we will see Gulf development, and it would most likely be in the Western Gulf or Louisiana, maybe toward Mississippi. And then if the further east you go in the Gulf, it's a little bit later. You get into late July and August, and then at the height of the season, you're still talking. Look, we had Ike in September? What was it, September 20th or something? Ike was. I don't know if any of you guys remember the date on that, but that it made landfall in Galveston. But generally speaking, it is August is their month for Texas, within a few occasional anomalies. September to October, I think they've been hit once in October, but it's early season for the Gulf, and if things aren't favorable, then they don't get a lot of activity in the Gulf. Look at 2005. July, I think we had like 8 storms or something, and they were all in the Gulf. A lot of them were going in the Gulf of Mexico, and it was favorable.
Right. So I wanted to ask you also, with the warm bodies of water, the anomalously warm waters over in the intertropical convergence zone off of Africa, and with the positive NAO and the warm body up around the Northeast, what are your thoughts for the Atlantic Basin to start the year? Other than, if you take away the upper shear, what do you think the pattern could be over the next month?
I think it's going to be tough in the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico for at least another few weeks. I was kind of thinking we might get early season development in the Gulf, but now I'm looking at it and thinking, I don't know. This pattern is, there's a lot of shear out there. So I think we're going to get off to a late start. But then again, again, to reference 2005, that got off to a late start. And then July, all of a sudden, things just took off like a racehorse. I think we're going to start out, we're going to see something in the Gulf of Mexico, probably in July, late June or July. Models are hinting maybe in a week or so we could see something in the Gulf. I think the shear is just too high right now to let anything develop out there. So I'm thinking late June, July, we're going to start seeing stuff in the Gulf, probably the typical half-sheared systems, tropical storms, that type of thing. And then we're going to have to wait till the height of the season to see the big boys come rolling along. That could be a threat, such as a Katrina or something like that. That's going to have to wait till the height of the season. But, anything's possible. Look, 2004, that was an El Nino year, and we had 15 named storms, and that was a very active year for the Gulf of Mexico with Ivan. And no, Dennis was in 2005. We had Ivan and we had Charlie. And of course, the east coast of Florida got hammered too. So that was an El Nino year. So don't even if people talk about the potential for an El Nino, it doesn't mean that it's going to be just a few storms we got to worry about. It could be an active year anyways.
Sure, yeah. I mean, you always want to watch your upper steering, your upper pattern for El Nino patterns. But how about homegrown systems? I wanted to ask you about that. I was just talking earlier about a large ridge building down from Canada. And a lot of times, especially earlier in the season, you still have these cold air masses or these large highs that built down. And they usually take something about 1,030 millibars or higher, maybe a 500 millibar high that parks to the north. And then any low pressures that develop along cold fronts, along tailends of cold fronts to the south, tend to grow homegrown storms or storms that develop inland of the southeast region or even the Gulf states and develop over the bodies of water once they enter the oceans or the Gulf of Mexico. So talk to us a little bit about your sort of thoughts on homegrown systems.
Well, one thing I've noticed last several big hurricanes that have come into the Gulf of Mexico, for example, like there's usually severe weather up in Iowa and Nebraska and South Dakota. And that's the storms on the northern side of that high pressure ridge you're talking about. They're probably on the tail end of a trough or something up that way. And then the clockwise flow usually allows more favorable conditions closer to home. And then we see the warm water. It taps into those warm waters down there in the Bahamas and the Western Caribbean. And, northeast of the Bahamas, the waters are really hot. The subsurface temperatures are really hot. And you get a favorable environment, and that's what we've seen. A lot of close to home systems have found themselves in favorable environments, with the exception of the Gulf of Mexico. Southeast, off the southeast coast, that's a hot spot for favorable conditions right near the Bahamas. The Bahamas are kind of like the Outer Banks of North Carolina. They're always getting hit. In fact, Great Abaco Island is the most hit area by hurricanes in the entire Atlantic Basin if you're counting hurricanes alone. So that's a really, really favorable area close to home is the Bahama Island. So that's where I'd be looking this year. Even though I don't have the Bahamas at high risk, in any given year they're sitting out there. It's ripe development area.
Yeah, that's about right along the heart of the Gulf Stream. They're just along the eastern side, and then the Outer Banks, of course, taps into the western side. So that any systems heading from south to north usually will try to follow any kind of fueling bed below it or whatever the steering pattern does. But Outer Banks, southeast North Carolina, we don't need any more hits there. They've had too much rain. They're still recovering. Heck, we're still trying to recover in Charleston from our October 2015 flooding. Then we had Matthew. And so we've been encountering some of the same flooding issues, but nothing nearly like what northern or northeastern South Carolina and southeast North Carolina have to deal with flooding issues, especially after last year. We had several tropical storms hit our coastline. We had 3. In fact, they had to create a high resolution box just for the National Hurricane Center wrap up at the end of the year to show how many systems came and installed out in the southeast region. So we're hoping that we don't fall into that category again this year.
Yeah, I'm surprised you're still above ground, to be honest with you. I mean, you've had so many storms affect you that have just dumped tons of rain. It was way before Matthew. What do we have?
Hermine.
Not Ophelia. You had a bunch of backdoor systems affect them as well. And I'm not just talking about last year, I'm talking about previous years to that. You've had a lot of flooding up there. And there was a hurricane, I think it was Alex, dumped a bunch of rain up in there. It's been like, what, it seems like, to me anyway, 3, 4, 5 years in a row where you've just had tons of rain up in that area from tropical systems. It's like,
that's right.
It's amazing. It truly is.
Arthur in 2014, that was a July 3, July 4 landfall in southeast North Carolina. And, we're a cereal bowl here. That's what we are. We're just
let me ask you guys something. What do you think is going to happen with the Outer Banks? You think how long is it going to take them to disappear?
That's a good question. Some of the, sea level SLR viewer from NOAA that's come out, they have their predictions. I have to look at the map. I haven't looked there. I've looked at Charleston. I've looked at Miami. Miami is actually on a higher scale of flooding over and having serious issues. I think they're number 1, and then you get up into the Charleston area in southeast North Carolina as 3rd for flooding issues. But yeah, they're the SLR viewer is the one that you should take a look at, or if you're watching the show, maybe I'll pull it up here in just a second and show you folks. But I know we're kind of coming on the 9 o'clock hour, and Scotty, if you wouldn't
mention,
go ahead.
Why you have that map open? Oh, you just X out of it. Okay, never mind. That you can zoom that map right down to street level, and it'll give you your population centers. I don't know if you're on my map or not. I don't know where you are. Are you on my map, or is that some other map? Oh, that's the best track. That's not the right map. Never mind. That's not the main map.
Okay. All right. Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Okay. I thought my computer at first. All right. Yeah, we are getting close to the 9 o'clock hour. Ricky, do you have anything else you want to?
I wanted Jim to talk about Cane Talk real quick. It seems like a good spot for people to kind of talk hurricanes, right?
Oh, absolutely. Cane Talk is our message board at Hurricane City, and we have a lot of people in there that really know their stuff. We don't differentiate between professionals and amateurs. Everybody's equal there, and there's a lot of people that are kind of incognito in there. They may be professional meteorologists, we don't know, but everybody uses nicknames, and there's a lot of good people in there that share maps and pictures and data, and it's a great community. It's been around for a long time, canetalk.com. And I'm in there all the time as well. I'd like to be in there more during the season, but a lot of times I'm busy. But there's a lot of people that are very knowledgeable. Chris Hollis from tropicalatlantic.com. He puts out a lot of the data at Hurricane City, and he's in the message board all the time, and he handles all the Hurricane Hunter reports, and it's a great community in there. So check that out.
All righty, very cool. Well, I'll throw it over to Scotty. Thank you, Jim, for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure having you, and we'll let Scotty wrap up the show.
I appreciate you guys having me on. I'm sorry about the camera problem.
Oh, no problem, Jim. And the last question I have for you before we kind of close off is, you've given your list of top 20 places to hit, and obviously we know there's hurricane-prone areas. As tomorrow starts the tropical season, what is your advice and word to all of our listeners tonight, or maybe those who are catching us on the rebroadcast that either live at the coast or have family at the coast or have property at the coast? What do you want them to come away with tonight, and what advice would you give them as we come into the tropical season?
Okay, well, let me just say this, and I wanted to get this out early, and I'll try to be quick, but the NOAA forecast of 7 to 11 named storms really kind of upsets me a little bit, because it's a very wide range of possibilities. There's 7 different possibilities of the amount of named storms, but the average Joe doesn't know what that means at all. They have no idea what 7 storms versus 11 storms, 11 versus 17 named storms is. They don't know what that means. That's what I do at Hurricane City, is try to clear that up and let people know what areas could be impacted based on an average season of 12 to 14 named storms. But what people need to be aware of is whether they're in a flood zone or not. That's the most important thing, whether you're in an evacuation zone. And if you are in an evacuation zone, learn how to get out of the area, when to get out of the area. Talk to your neighbors that have been through other hurricanes and kind of find out what they're doing. They might have a better idea of how it floods in your area, or whether it's, you definitely got to get out, or yeah, you could probably stick it out if it's a category 1 or 2 or something. But just be familiar. If you're new to the area, talk to your neighbors and become familiar with the terrain of the land. And where the shelters are and what you need to do. And of course, watch your local news. Tomorrow there's going to be a whole bunch of hurricane programs on where you can learn what you need to prepare for a hurricane. That's not my expertise, but that's the best place. Watch your local news, and there's all kinds of sources on the internet to learn how to prepare for hurricanes.
All right, Jim. Well, we appreciate you being along with us tonight. Go ahead, promote your social media, your website once again, how our followers can follow you throughout the hurricane season, and if they need to contact you, give them that outlet as well.
All right, you can reach me on Twitter at HurricaneCity, on Facebook, facebook.com/HurricaneCityTracking, and you can email me, jim@hurricanecity.com. I'm the kind of person that if you ask me a question on social media, I will get back to you. I'm not going to ignore you or mute you. I will get back to people and ask their questions as long as I have the time. Sometimes I'm really swamped if I'm in a hurricane chasing it or something, but I will get back to you.
Sounds good. And Jim, maybe we can get you back on the program sometime this winter and kind of do a little review of your predictions and review of the hurricane season altogether.
Sure, I would love that very much. Anytime you want me on the show, I'm happy to join you.
Awesome. Well, we appreciate it. Good luck this season out there. If you do get to go chase some hurricanes, stay safe, and we'll definitely push your website and any videos and stuff like that across our social media platforms as well, so our viewers can see that. So, Jim, once again, thanks for joining us. Next week, we will have Tony Rice on the show. We'll kind of talk about the eclipse that's coming up in August 21st. So Tony is going to join us, kind of give us the lowdown of what to expect and where the best places to view, and kind of talk all things eclipse, because, guys, we're coming towards August pretty quickly, and this is going to be a big event throughout the entire country. And Shay, you're in the prime spot for it, because I think it goes right over Charleston.
That's right. We're the last spot in the United States that's going to pass over. So we're going to rent our house out for $5,000 for the weekend. So if you want to come stay, come on down.
Nice.
There you go. So Tony Rice will join us next week. So we hope that you'll join us and watch that. It's going to be a very informative show, and I know you'll enjoy it. Tony's a great guy. So for all of us here at the Carolina Weather Group, we hope you have an outstanding week. The rest of the week, have a great weekend, and we will see you back here next Wednesday night at 8 p.m. with Tony Rice. Have a good one.